Okay, picture this. You're about to walk into your boss's office for a meeting, and you have absolutely no idea what it's about. You know that knot in your stomach, that racing heart, that feeling. Could you trust those reactions? Could you even, control them if you had to? Well, that's what we're diving into today, this whole wild world of emotions. We're using Paul Ekman's Emotions Revealed as our guide, which I just say is super fascinating. We've got excerpts from both the audiobook and the text itself, which gives us a multi-dimensional look at how our emotions work.
Yeah, that meeting scenario, I mean, that's so relatable, right? For years, people thought facial expressions were just cultural, like something you learned, like table manners. But Ekman's work really turned that idea on its head.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. So how did he actually prove everyone wrong?
Well, his research with the four people of New Guinea was a total game changer. This was a culture that was so isolated they'd had basically zero exposure to Western ways at that point. And what Ekman did was he showed them photos of different facial expressions, right?
Yeah.
And asked them to make up stories about what was happening in each picture.
Wait, so you're telling me someone who had never even seen a Hollywood movie could still recognize, sadness or anger in a photograph?
Exactly.
Ugh.
And they nailed it, too. They matched the expressions to emotions like happiness, surprise, fear, just like you or I would. And this research, along with studies on people who have been blind since birth, it really helps solidify this idea that there are these 7 basic emotions that have universal facial expressions.
Wow, so it's like we're all born with this built-in emotional language.
Yeah, I mean, think about how important that would have been for early humans, right? Like, imagine needing to instantly communicate danger or, the discovery of food. There was no time for small talk back then.
It makes you wonder what the evolutionary advantage of each of these emotions really was, huh?
Absolutely.
It reminds me of that story Ekman tells about Sylvan Tompkins, his mentor. Tompkins could, literally read emotions from micro-expressions.
Yeah.
He'd pinpoint this tiny muscle twitch and be like, oh, that's fear right there.
Yeah, Tompkins was incredible. It really debunks that whole emotions are just words argument, doesn't it?
Totally. We all know that. Sinking feeling in your stomach when you're nervous or how your face gets hot when you're embarrassed. It's so much more than just a label.
Right. Emotions are these complex processes that are rooted in our biology with physical changes, behavioral urges. It's not just, seeing something and then instantly reacting.
Yeah.
There are actually many different paths to an emotional response.
Oh, really? I always thought it was pretty straightforward. Something happens, we feel something, boom, done.
That's what a lot of people think, yeah. And it's called automatic appraisal, and it definitely plays a huge role. But Ekman actually identified 8 other ways that we can get triggered emotionally, like memories, imagination, even talking about an experience can set us off. You can even trigger a real emotion just by making the facial expression.
Wait, are you serious? You're saying if I, fake a smile, I might actually start feeling happy?
Well, there's evidence for it.
Mhm.
Ekman and his colleague, Friesen, they were studying facial muscles, trying to map out which ones were involved in each expression.
Hmm.
And sometimes, bam, they'd end up feeling the emotion they were mimicking.
Whoa, that's kind of freaky. Talk about method acting, right? But it does make you think, how much control do we really have over this stuff?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it really highlights how many of our emotional triggers and responses are involuntary. Our brains are constantly scanning for threats and rewards, even if we're not consciously aware of it. Ekman uses this idea of an emotion alert database to explain it. Imagine this massive library in your brain filled with all your emotional triggers.
Okay, so my fear of spiders is like a whole section in that library. Please tell me it's a small section.
Well, that fear is a perfect example of how this database works. There are universal themes like the fear of harm. That's built in. It's for survival. But then on top of that, we all have these individual variations based on our personal experiences. So your spider fear isn't universal, but it's built on that fundamental fear of threat.
So someone else might have, the wild pig section of the library totally filled out based on where they grew up.
Exactly. It's fascinating, isn't it? And there's research by a guy named Armanon that suggests we might be biologically primed to fear certain things like snakes and spiders more easily than, say, butterflies.
Yeah.
But even then, you still need some kind of experience to cement that fear into your database.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those triggers that we wish we could just, delete? Like in the book, when Helen feels dominated by her husband, even if it's not really happening.
That's where things get really interesting.
Hmm.
And we start to wonder if we can ever truly escape those emotional patterns.
Right. I mean, who hasn't wished they could just hit delete on that one thing that always sets them off?
I know I have. But this is where Ledoux's concept of indelible fear learning comes in. He suggests that while we may not be able to, completely wipe the database clean, we can learn to interrupt the connection between the trigger, the emotional response, and our behavior.
So it's not about erasing the memory, but rewiring how we react to it. Kind of like hitting the pause button before we launch into a full-blown meltdown.
Exactly. Think back to Tim in the book. Because of his father's cruel jokes during his childhood, he learned to react to any teasing with anger. That script got, hardwired into his database.
So his brain was basically on autopilot, going straight back to that painful experience, even if the teasing was harmless.
Right, but here's the good news. Tim was able to weaken those learned triggers. Through journaling, he started recognizing when his anger was out of proportion, and he learned to challenge those automatic thoughts.
So he didn't erase the memory, but he changed how it affected him in the present. That's actually pretty empowering.
It is. We're not rewriting the past, but we are changing how it influences us now. We're taking control of the narrative. But what about those times when it feels like our emotions are completely running the show? Like we're on that runaway train you mentioned earlier.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. It's like one minute you're fine, and the next you're saying or doing things you totally regret later.
That's where Tompkins' concept of effect programs comes in.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break this down for me. What are effect programs exactly?
Think of them as, the central command centers for emotional behavior. They contain both pre-programmed evolutionary instructions and learned responses from our own lives.
So if the emotion alert database is like a library of triggers, are effect programs the librarians who decide which book to open?
That's a fantastic way to think about it. And the key thing is, once an effect program is activated, it's involuntary and non-interruptible, at least for that initial burst.
So once the alarm bells are ringing, we're kind of along for the ride.
For a brief time, yes. It's like this domino effect, triggering facial expressions, tone of voice, bodily changes, even behavioral urges. Think of Helen getting annoyed when her husband tells her to pick up their daughter.
Right, and her anger is stemming from that learned script about feeling dominated, which is probably linked to some past experience.
Exactly. In that moment, her affect program is running the show. Her facial expression changes, her voice sharpens, her body tenses up. It all happens so fast.
But then she finds out her husband had a work emergency, and her anger fades because she realizes he wasn't being inconsiderate. So those initial responses, while powerful, aren't always accurate or long-lasting.
Right. The affect program runs its course, and then we have this window to reevaluate and change our behavior. It's like a wave. It crashes over us, but then it recedes, and we can decide how to navigate the aftermath.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we even begin to manage those waves, especially when they feel so overwhelming? Is there a secret to staying afloat?
That's where the idea of mindfulness comes in. It's about becoming aware of our emotional experience as it's happening, which gives us more control over how we ride those waves.
Hold on, so we're not talking about, meditating on a mountaintop for hours, right? Give me the practical stuff.
Of course, although meditation can be a helpful tool. But in this context, mindfulness is about being present with our emotions, noticing those triggers and physical sensations, and maybe even questioning those initial reactions. We're creating that pause, that split-second gap between feeling and reacting, which opens up a world of possibilities.
So it's like becoming a curious observer of our own inner world, rather than getting swept away by every emotion.
Precisely. And this awareness is incredibly powerful. It allows us to potentially modify our responses in real time and choose how we want to behave.
This is all starting to click. It's like we're learning to be the conductor of our own emotional orchestra rather than just being a musician playing whatever notes come up. But how do we actually develop that kind of awareness? Is it something we're born with, or can we learn it?
That's a fantastic question. And the answer, thankfully, is that attentiveness is a skill we can cultivate. It's like building the muscle. The more we practice, the stronger it gets. But let's dig into those specific techniques in part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from those universal facial expressions to the idea of an emotion alert database and those powerful effect programs that can sometimes feel like they're totally hijacking our behavior. But the question that's really lingering in my mind is, how do we actually put all this knowledge into practice? How do we become more mindful and master those emotional waves, as you put it?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. It's all well and good understanding these concepts, but
Yeah.
if we can't apply them in our daily lives, it's kind of like knowing the theory is swimming but never actually getting in the water,
Totally. So let's dive into those practical techniques for cultivating attentiveness. Where do we even begin?
Well, the first step is probably the most crucial, and that's understanding our emotional triggers. We need to become, detectives of our inner world, identifying those specific situations, people, or even thoughts that tend to set off those intense emotional reactions.
So it's like keeping a journal of those moments when we feel those big emotions bubbling up, like Tim did with his anger.
Precisely. By paying attention to patterns, noticing common themes, and exploring the underlying reasons behind those reactions, we start to gain valuable insights into our emotional landscape.
And once we kind of know our triggers, we can start to anticipate them and prepare ourselves for those situations. It's like having a heads up that a storm might be brewing so we can uh, batten down the hatches, so to speak.
Exactly. It's about shifting from being reactive to proactive. Instead of simply being swept away by the current, we're learning to navigate the waters with more skill and awareness.
Okay, that makes sense. So we're becoming more mindful of our triggers. What's the next step in this emotional intelligence boot camp?
Well, the next piece of the puzzle is recognizing the bodily sensations that are associated with different emotions. It's about tuning in to how our bodies feel when we're experiencing anger, sadness, fear, joy, or any other emotion.
So we're not just paying attention to the thoughts and feelings in our heads, but also what's happening in our bodies. It's like becoming more attuned to that mind-body connection.
Exactly. Do we feel tension in our shoulders? A tightness in our chest? Does our heart race? Do our palms sweat? Each emotion has its own unique physiological fingerprint.
Yeah, it's like our bodies are sending us these signals, these little whispers of what's going on beneath the surface. And by paying attention to those signals, we're essentially getting this early warning system for our emotions.
Precisely. It's like noticing the smoke before the fire fully ignites. We're becoming more sensitive to those subtle cues that often precede our full-blown emotional reactions.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. We're understanding our triggers, recognizing our bodily sensations. What other tools can we add to our emotional toolbox?
Another powerful technique is observing the emotions of others. This involves paying attention to those subtle facial expressions, vocal tones, and body language cues that we often miss in our day-to-day interactions.
It's like we're becoming these emotional detectives, learning to read the unspoken language of feelings. But I have to admit, I'm not always great at picking up on those subtle cues. It's easy to get caught up in our own heads and miss what's going on around us.
That's true for many of us, yeah. But the good news is that this is a skill we can develop with practice. It's like learning a new language. The more we immerse ourselves in it, the more fluent we become.
So by paying attention to the emotions of others, we're not only becoming more empathetic, but also more attuned to our own emotional responses. It's like we're expanding our emotional vocabulary and becoming more fluent in the language of feelings.
Exactly. It's this virtuous cycle of emotional awareness. And as we become more skilled at recognizing those nuances in others, we also become more attuned to those same nuances within ourselves.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense. So by understanding our triggers, recognizing our bodily sensations, and observing others, we're essentially building those attentiveness muscles, right?
That's a fantastic way to put it. We're developing that crucial ability to pause, observe, and choose how we want to respond to our emotions. It's about shifting from being a passenger on that runaway train to becoming the conductor, guiding the direction of our emotional journey.
I love that analogy. It really captures the essence of what we're talking about, taking back control of the narrative, as you said earlier. But let's be honest, even with all the attentiveness in the world, there are going to be times when those emotions just feel overwhelming. Those moments when we lose it, say things we regret, or react in ways that don't align with our values. How do we deal with those inevitable slip-ups?
You're absolutely right. We're all human, and we all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, and expecting ourselves to never experience those moments of emotional overwhelm is unrealistic. And frankly, setting ourselves up for disappointment.
So it's not about achieving some unattainable state of emotional perfection, but about learning to navigate those rough waters with more grace and compassion.
Precisely. And this is where the concept of emotional regulation comes in. It's about developing the skills to modulate our responses, express our feelings in healthy and constructive ways, and ultimately choose our behavior wisely, even in the heat of the moment.
Okay, so we're talking about becoming the masters of our emotions rather than letting them master us. But how do we actually do that? Is there a step-by-step guide to emotional regulation?
Well, while there isn't a one-size-fits-all guide, there are some incredibly effective techniques that can help us become more skilled emotional navigators. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing process of learning, growing, and refining our emotional intelligence.
So it's like we're constantly fine-tuning our emotional instruments, learning to play them with more skill and finesse.
Exactly. And just like learning to play a musical instrument, it takes time, effort, and a lot of patience. but the rewards are well worth the investment.
Okay, I'm sold. I'm ready to start practicing my emotional scales. But I'm still curious about those people who seem to be naturally gifted at handling their emotions. Are they just like wired differently, or is there something we can learn from them?
That's a great question. And while it's true that some people might have a temperamental predisposition towards certain emotional styles, maybe they're naturally more easygoing or resilient, emotional intelligence isn't solely determined by genetics.
So it's not like some people are born with emotional superpowers while others are doomed to struggle.
Not at all. Research suggests that emotional intelligence is a malleable skill, something we can cultivate and strengthen through practice and conscious effort. It's about nurturing those emotional muscles, just like we would nurture any other skill we want to develop.
Okay, that's a relief to hear. It means we all have the potential to become more emotionally intelligent, regardless of our starting point. But I'm curious, what role do our early childhood experiences play in shaping our emotional development?
That's a crucial question. Our early childhood experiences, particularly the ways in which our caregivers responded to our emotions, have a profound impact on how we learn to manage and express our own feelings. If we grew up in an environment where emotions were validated and regulated effectively, we're more likely to develop those skills ourselves. It's like we absorb those emotional blueprints from our early caregivers.
So if our parents were like masters of emotional regulation, we're more likely to inherit those skills. But what if our early experiences weren't so ideal? Are we doomed to repeat those patterns?
Not necessarily. While our early experiences can certainly shape our emotional tendencies, we're not prisoners of our past. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout life, gives us hope that we can rewire those emotional circuits, even if those early blueprints weren't the best.
So it's like we're given a set of tools early on, but we can always learn to upgrade those tools and create new, healthier patterns of emotional responding.
Exactly. It's about becoming the architects of our own emotional well-being. And this brings us to the fascinating concept of emotional styles.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break this down for me. What are emotional styles and how do they influence our lives?
Well, Ekman identifies several key dimensions of emotional style, and each of these dimensions exist on a spectrum. It's not like we're either one way or the other. There's a lot of nuance and individuality in how our emotions manifest.
Hit me with those dimensions. What are the different ways our emotions can show up?
Well, there's outlook, which refers to our general tendency towards optimism or pessimism. Are we the type of person who sees the glass as half full or half empty? Do we generally approach life with a sense of hope and possibility, or do we tend to focus on the negative?
So it's about our baseline emotional temperature, so to speak. Some people just seem to be naturally sunnier than others.
Exactly. And then there's resilience, our ability to bounce back from adversity. When faced with challenges or setbacks, do we tend to crumble under pressure, or do we find ways to cope, learn, and move forward?
It's like some people have this inner spring, an ability to bounce back from those inevitable bumps in the road. But for others, those bumps can feel like insurmountable obstacles.
Precisely. And this dimension of resilience is crucial for navigating the ups and downs of life. Then we have self-awareness, which is all about recognizing and understanding our own emotions. Are we tuned into our emotional landscape, or are we often clueless about what we're feeling?
It's like some people have an inner emotional GPS while others are constantly getting lost in their own feelings.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And then there's social intuition, which is our ability to read and understand the emotions of others. Are we good at picking up on those subtle cues, or are we often oblivious to what's going on emotionally around us?
It's like some people are emotional chameleons, able to blend in and understand the emotional climate of any situation.
Exactly. And lastly, there's sensitivity to context, our ability to adapt our emotional expression to different situations. Do we know when it's appropriate to express our emotions freely and when we need to rein them in?
It's like having an emotional volume knob, knowing when to turn it up and when to turn it down.
Precisely. And all of these dimensions, outlook, resilience, self-awareness, social intuition, and sensitivity to context, come together to create our unique emotional style. It's like a fingerprint, a unique combination of traits that shapes how we experience and express our emotions.
So it's not about judging one style as better than another, but about recognizing and embracing the diversity of emotional expression. We all have our own unique ways of experiencing the world, and that's something to be celebrated, right?
Absolutely. And the fascinating thing is that our emotional style isn't set in stone. It's shaped by a combination of genetics, early childhood experiences, and ongoing learning throughout life. It's a dynamic interplay of nature and nurture.
So even if we tend towards like pessimism or low resilience, we can learn to cultivate a more positive and adaptable emotional approach to life.
Absolutely. It's about becoming aware of our tendencies, practicing new ways of responding, and seeking support from others when we need it. It's a journey of self-discovery and emotional growth.
This is all starting to click. It's like we're becoming the architects of our own emotional well-being, learning to design a life that aligns with our values and aspirations.
Exactly. And by understanding and working with our emotional styles, we can create a more fulfilling and harmonious life. It's about embracing our individual differences and finding what works best for us.
Mm. Okay, I'm loving this conversation. But we've covered a lot of ground, from attentiveness to emotional styles. What are some like key takeaways we can apply to our daily lives as we continue this journey of emotional mastery? So we've explored all those practical techniques for like building attentiveness, becoming more aware of our triggers, tuning into those bodily sensations, and even, reading those emotional cues from other people. And we even dove into those fascinating emotional styles, realizing that we all have these unique ways of experiencing and expressing our feelings. But as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into the world of emotions, I'm curious, what are the big picture takeaways? How can we actually use all of this knowledge to create a more fulfilling and emotionally intelligent life?
That's a fantastic question. And I think it's super important to emphasize that emotions, in and of themselves, are not the enemy. They're not something to be like feared or suppressed. In fact, they're these incredibly valuable sources of information, guiding our decisions, shaping our relationships, and ultimately adding this richness and depth to our human experience.
Yeah, it's like they're our internal compass, kind of pointing us towards what really matters most. But like you said earlier, just like any compass, they need to be calibrated and used skillfully.
Exactly. And that's where all this work we've been discussing comes in, right? Building attentiveness is about developing that awareness of our emotional landscape, noticing those triggers, recognizing those bodily sensations, observing the emotions of others. It's about creating that space between like the stimulus and our response. That
Mhm.
pause that lets us actually choose how we want to react, rather than simply being swept away by the current.
And that choice is so empowering, wouldn't you say? It's like we're moving from being a passenger on that emotional roller coaster to becoming the conductor. We get to guide the direction of our experience.
I love that analogy. It really captures the essence of emotional regulation, right? It's not about denying or suppressing our feelings, but it's about modulating our responses, expressing them in healthy and constructive ways, and ultimately choosing our behavior wisely.
So we're talking about becoming the masters of our emotions rather than letting them master us. But let's be real, it's a journey, right? There are going to be times when we fall off the mindfulness wagon. There's times when those emotions just feel overwhelming and we, react in ways we later regret.
Absolutely. We're all human, and expecting ourselves to be perfectly emotionally regulated all the time is, well, it's unrealistic. And frankly, it's a recipe for self-criticism. This journey is about progress, not perfection. It's about learning from those slip-ups, those moments when we get hijacked by our emotions, and using those experiences to refine our skills and build greater resilience.
That makes me think of Tim's story again. He didn't magically erase his anger, but he learned to recognize those triggers and interrupt those automatic responses. He was able to rewrite the narrative, so to speak.
Exactly. And that's a powerful reminder that even those really deep-seated emotional patterns, they can be shifted. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to be like compassionate with ourselves along the way. But as we cultivate attentiveness, learn to regulate our responses, and embrace our unique emotional styles, we open ourselves up to a much more fulfilling and meaningful life.
I'm so glad we dug into this topic. It's given me a whole new perspective on how to navigate all the complexities of, well, just being human. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, if there's one thing I hope listeners take away from this deep dive, it's this. Emotions are powerful, but they don't have to control us. We have far more agency than we often realize. And by understanding the science of emotions, we can learn to harness their power, use them as guides, and ultimately become the authors of our own emotional well-being.
Beautifully said. And for those listening, if this deep dive sparked your curiosity about a particular emotion, let us know. Maybe it'll inspire our next exploration into the fascinating world of human feelings. Until then, keep diving deep. And remember, you are the conductor of your own emotional orchestra.